Before we begin, I want to speak to the one who feels like they're fading, not because they're lost, but because the world keeps telling them who to be. If you've ever felt the quiet pressure to shrink, to silence your truth, to trade your authenticity for acceptance, this is for you. You're not crazy for feeling out of place. You're not rebellious for thinking differently. You're simply awake in a world that rewards imitation and punishes individuality. They call it progress, connection, community. But underneath, something darker is moving. A quiet war against the individual mind. It doesn't come with chains or soldiers. It comes with trends, with approval, with the subtle conditioning that tells you, fit in or disappear. Bit by bit, the world convinces you that being yourself is dangerous, that standing alone is arrogance, that thinking for yourself is rebellion. And so, you learn to wear the mask. You scroll, you post, you conform, all while a voice inside you whispers that something sacred is being stolen. Because it is. The soul was never meant to move as part of a crowd. It was meant to see, to question, to create. But the collective shadow feeds on obedience. It thrives on sameness. This story is for the ones who are quietly resisting the thinkers, the dreamers, the souls who refuse to trade their depth for belonging. Because when you start to awaken, you'll realize the real battle was never out there. It's within. Between the self you were born to be and the one the world demands you become. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover in this story is not rebellion, it's remembrance. They don't want you to be yourself, because a person who truly is themselves cannot be controlled. It begins so quietly, you might not even notice it. One day you wake up and realize that everyone around you is pretending. The laughter feels rehearsed. The smiles seem polished, like glass. Even your own reflection has learned to pose. Somewhere along the way, people stopped being people and started becoming performances. You learn early that truth doesn't always win applause, but a well-crafted mask does. It starts in small ways. The boy who hides his sadness because strength gets more respect. The girl who pretends confidence because insecurity isn't trending. The worker who smiles through exhaustion because everything's fine sells better than I'm falling apart. The world rewards the illusion, not the honesty. So we adapt. We polish the edges. We learn to sell a version of ourselves that's easy to love, easy to like, easy to consume. The self becomes a brand, not a being. The digital mirror amplifies it. Every post, every photo, every story, a new layer of disguise. You start editing your own humanity, filtering out what's real and replacing it with what's acceptable. The truth becomes too raw, too heavy, too unmarketable. People don't want your soul. They want your highlight reel. So you give them what they'll applaud. You learn the rules of the stage, how to sound deep without being vulnerable, how to look happy without being whole. But underneath, something starts to ache. You can feel it, that quiet rebellion inside that doesn't want to play anymore. The mask starts to itch. You can't breathe properly behind it. It's like being trapped inside a costume that once felt powerful, but now feels suffocating. The smile begins to feel like a lie. The performance begins to blur the line between who you are and who you pretend to be. And the scariest part? You start forgetting which one is real. We live in the age of the mask, where silence is suspicious, depth is uncomfortable, and being genuine is risky. People say they want the truth, but only if it's pretty. We trade authenticity for approval, forgetting that approval is a currency that never buys peace. We chase validation like it's oxygen, but it never fills the lungs. It only feeds the persona, leaving the soul starving in the dark. Every now and then, though, the mask cracks. A moment of rawness slips through a tear, a tremor, a truth too heavy to hide. And for a split second, someone sees you. Not the version you sell, not the role you play, but you. It feels terrifying, yet holy, because in that brief exposure, you remember what it means to be alive, to feel, to exist without pretense. Maybe that's where the awakening begins, in the quiet recognition that you are tired of pretending, that you no longer want to impress, only to express, that the face you've been showing the world isn't your own. The age of the mask can only last as long as we're afraid to remove it. But once you do, once you dare to be seen, the performance ends, and the person finally begins. The world has never been louder. Every second, something fights for your attention: notifications, headlines, opinions, flashing screens, endless noise. It's like standing in the middle of a storm made of voices, all shouting at once, all demanding to be heard. And in that chaos, something sacred goes missing. The quiet space where the soul used to speak. You wake up and reach for your phone before your thoughts even form. A scroll, a click, a like, and the day begins not with reflection, but reaction. The mind doesn't rest anymore. It refreshes. The heart doesn't feel. It consumes. We mistake stimulation for life, movement for meaning, noise for connection. But deep down, we know we're just trying not to be left alone with ourselves. Because silence has become unbearable. The moment the world goes quiet, the mind begins to whisper. And what it whispers isn't always kind. It reminds you of the things you've been avoiding, the fears, the doubts, the emptiness you try to fill with sound. So you drown it out. You keep scrolling, keep watching, keep listening, until you forget what silence even feels like. There's a strange comfort in the noise. It keeps you from feeling too deeply, from thinking too long, from noticing that something's missing. It wraps around you like a fog, blurring the edges of awareness. You don't have to face your loneliness if you can distract yourself from it. You don't have to feel your sadness if there's always a new video, a new song, a new voice to replace your own. The soul, once a vast landscape, has become a crowded room and there's no air left inside. But sometimes, late at night, when the notifications finally fade and the screens dim to black, you feel it, that quiet ache underneath everything. The stillness you've been avoiding waits patiently, like a friend you've ignored for too long. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it just exists, heavy, honest, and real. In that moment, you realize the noise was never the enemy. It was the escape. The real battle is between distraction and presence, between hearing everything and listening to yourself. If you sit in the silence long enough, something unexpected happens. The noise inside begins to settle. The emptiness you feared turns into space, room for thought, for feeling, for truth. You begin to notice small things again: the sound of your breath, the hum of life outside your window, the rhythm of your heartbeat. You remember that peace isn't found in having more to hear, but in having less to run from. The world will keep shouting. That won't change, but you can. You can choose to pause, to turn the volume down, to remember that your worth isn't measured by how much you consume or how connected you appear, but by how deeply you can be still. Because in a world addicted to noise, silence is not emptiness, it's power. It's the sound of the soul returning home. We learn who we are by looking at others. From the moment we're old enough to notice, the world becomes a mirror, reflecting back what it wants us to see. A raised eyebrow, a compliment, a silence that feels like judgment. Every reaction shapes the image we build of ourselves. We don't ask, "Who am I?" We ask, "Who do they think I am?" And slowly, piece by piece, we start living inside their reflection instead of our own. It feels harmless at first. You just want to fit in, to belong. You adjust your tone, your clothes, your opinions. You learn which parts of yourself earn approval and which ones earn silence. You watch faces as you speak, scanning for signs that you're saying the right thing. And when someone laughs, when someone nods, it feels like oxygen. That little rush of being accepted becomes addictive. You start chasing it without realizing that it's shaping you. The crowd becomes your compass. What they like, you like. What they mock, you avoid. The mirror tells you who to be confident but not too much, deep but not weird, authentic but still appealing. It feels safe until one day you notice that the reflection no longer matches the face behind it. You look around and realize everyone's doing the same thing, performing for each other, feeding off reactions, trapped in a circle of mutual pretending. But the mirror lies. It shows you what the world rewards, not who you truly are. And the more you depend on it, the more you forget how to see yourself without it. You start to panic when it goes dark, when no one's watching, liking, commenting. The silence feels like disappearance. If no one's reacting to you, do you even exist? That's how deep the illusion runs. The crowd becomes your proof of being, yet, somewhere deep inside, a quieter truth begins to stir. You start sensing that there's a difference between being seen and being known. The crowd sees only surfaces. They can't touch the parts of you that don't fit the script, the private thoughts, the secret fears, the quiet dreams that make no sense to anyone else. Those parts exist beyond the mirror. They don't need applause. They need honesty. The moment you stop chasing reflection, you start reclaiming reality. It's disorienting at first, like walking away from bright lights into the dark. But slowly your eyes adjust. You begin to see yourself from the inside out, not the outside in. The opinions that once defined you lose their grip. You realize that the crowd was never your mirror, it was your mask. And when it shatters, what's left isn't emptiness, it's you. To stand apart from the mirror takes courage. It means letting go of the constant need to be seen and choosing instead to see yourself. The crowd will keep watching, keep judging, keep reflecting its noise. But your soul, quiet, steady, unfiltered, will finally look back from within, saying, "Now you remember who you are." It looks like light, but it isn't. It glows on screens, in eyes, in words polished to perfection. A shine that feels like truth, but carries no warmth. The world has learned to worship this kind of brightness. Followers replace friends, attention replaces intimacy, and influence replaces meaning. We live beneath artificial suns, chasing their glow until we mistake it for life. But somewhere deep down, we know the light isn't real. It's just a reflection bouncing between empty mirrors. The false light begins with the promise of connection. It tells you, be visible, and you'll be loved. It whispers that if you can make enough people notice you, you'll finally matter. So you start curating not just your image, but your entire existence. You craft moments for display, emotions for effect. You learn which words get attention and which truths get ignored. And slowly, the self becomes something you edit rather than live. It's seductive because it works. The more you glow, the more people look. The likes rise, the comments pour in, the attention feels like sunlight on skin. For a moment, it feels real. The validation, the belonging, the illusion of significance. But the warmth fades quickly, and you find yourself refreshing, posting, performing again. The hunger returns faster each time. What once felt like light begins to feel like addiction. The false light feeds on reaction, not reflection. It keeps you shining outward but never inward. You start mistaking exposure for evolution, performance for purpose. You look happy in pictures, inspired in captions, enlightened in tone. But when you put the phone down, the glow disappears and the emptiness returns. It's a hollow kind of living, like standing in a room full of mirrors and never seeing your own eyes. The tragedy is that it's everywhere now, a collective masquerade of meaning. People chase trends instead of truth, attention instead of awareness. The goal isn't to be something, it's to appear as something. And the world applauds it. Authenticity becomes aesthetic. Depth becomes a marketing tool. Even vulnerability becomes a performance. The light that was meant to guide us now blinds us instead. But every illusion eventually flickers. There comes a night when you can't bear the brightness anymore. When the glow that once made you feel powerful now exposes how lost you really are. In that moment, the hollow shine begins to collapse, and for the first time, you see the darkness beneath it. It's frightening, but also freeing, because beneath the false light, there's something truer, a softer, quieter glow that doesn't demand attention, only honesty. That's the real light, the one that doesn't need an audience, that grows in silence, that warms from within. It's not loud or perfect. It doesn't sparkle for strangers. It simply is. The false light may be everywhere, but the real one begins where you stop performing. In a world addicted to the glow, the bravest thing you can do is go dark just long enough to find the fire that's actually yours. Beneath the glow of every screen, something darker stirs. It hides behind the smiles, the filters, the carefully crafted words. It lives in what's not said, in the jealousy behind the likes, the emptiness behind the laughter, the quiet pain behind the polished image. We think the screen connects us, but more often it conceals us. It becomes the stage for our light, while our shadows wait, unseen, growing heavier with everything we refuse to face. Every scroll is a mirror not of who we are, but of what we hide. We compare, envy, and judge without realizing that what we see in others is often what we can't bear to see in ourselves. We project our insecurities, our fears, our desires onto strangers we'll never meet. We call them lucky, fake, arrogant, broken, but what we're really describing is the unspoken part of us that longs for attention, love, or release. The more we deny our darkness, the more it takes control in silence. This is the collective shadow, not just personal pain, but the emotional waste of an entire generation pretending to be fine. It grows with every lie we post, every truth we suppress, every wound we decorate instead of heal. We scroll through a world where everyone shines while secretly sinking. The more we chase perfection, the more ashamed we become of being human, and the shadow feeds on that shame. It's why outrage spreads faster than empathy, why gossip feels good for a second, why comparison keeps us hooked. These are the small eruptions of a shadow that can't stay buried forever. The more we repress, the more it leaks out in anger, cruelty, cynicism, or despair. It's the reason so many feel hollow even when surrounded by people, why the noise keeps growing but meaning keeps fading. We've built a digital empire of light without realizing we've buried our souls in its foundation. But the shadow isn't evil. It's forgotten. It's the part of us that holds everything we've abandoned. Our grief, our guilt, our tenderness, our truth. It doesn't want to destroy us. It wants to be seen. Every time we stop pretending, every time we admit, I'm not okay, the shadow softens. It becomes less of a monster and more of a mirror. It shows us where we've been hiding and what we've been running from. Facing it isn't easy. It means turning off the noise, stepping away from the endless scroll, and sitting in the discomfort of being real. But in that stillness, something powerful happens. The false glow fades, and a different kind of light begins to emerge. Not the blinding performative kind, but the steady warmth of self-awareness. The screen may hide the shadow, but it can't erase it. One day, the masks will slip, the filters will fade, and what's repressed will rise. And when it does, the ones brave enough to face their darkness will be the ones who truly see. Because the shadow beneath the screen isn't the enemy, it's the truth waiting to come home. What we refuse to face doesn't disappear, it waits. Every unspoken fear, every buried anger, every swallowed sadness collects in the dark like rainwater pooling under a house. We think silence is control, that by pretending something isn't there, we keep it from hurting us. But the truth is, denial only feeds what we hide. The things we push down grow teeth, and when they've been ignored for too long, they come back hungry. You can see it everywhere, in the constant outrage online, in the quiet bitterness behind polite smiles, in the way people tear each other down just to feel something real. The collective shadow feeds on all that is denied. It consumes every emotion we're too ashamed to admit. The jealousy when someone succeeds, the rage we disguise as honesty, the grief we numb with distraction. What's repressed in the individual becomes poisonous in the crowd. Together, our hidden pain becomes an unseen feast, and we are both the diners and the meal. The world teaches us to hide what's uncomfortable. Don't be angry. Don't be jealous. Don't be too emotional. Be balanced. Be positive. Be presentable. So we bury these feelings deep, convincing ourselves they're gone. But nothing in the psyche ever truly disappears. It just changes shape. The rage turns into judgment. The envy becomes comparison. The grief becomes emptiness. We end up haunted by the ghosts of emotions we refuse to feel. It's easier to point fingers than to look inward. That's how the shadow keeps itself alive. It whispers, "They're the problem." It feeds on our division, our projections, our need to find villains outside ourselves. We build tribes of outrage, communities of blame, all the while avoiding the one confrontation that could actually free us, the one with our own reflection. The more we deny what's within, the more we feed what's without. But facing the forgotten is an act of courage. It means sitting with envy until you see the longing beneath it. It means allowing anger to burn, not as destruction, but as truth demanding to be heard. It means letting grief wash through you, cleansing the parts that have gone numb. When we face what we've buried, we stop feeding the collective shadow. We reclaim what it stole from us: energy, passion, authenticity. The feast only ends when we remember that darkness isn't our enemy, it's our teacher. It holds the lessons we were too afraid to learn in the light. When we finally look into that darkness and name what we see, something changes. The hunger begins to quiet. The chaos loses its edge. And from the ashes of what we denied, something whole begins to form a self, no longer split in two. The forgotten cannot stay buried forever. The shadow will keep feasting until we turn toward it, not with fear, but with understanding. Because what the world calls darkness is often just the light we were too ashamed to claim. It's not made of metal or gears, but it hums beneath everything the machine. You can't see it, but you feel it. In the pressure to keep up, the need to prove yourself, the endless craving for more. It smiles through advertisements, scrolls through feeds, and whispers through every glowing screen. It doesn't need force to control people. It only needs their attention. The machine thrives on unconsciousness, feeding on the parts of us that never stop hungering. It knows our weaknesses better than we do. It studies our fears, measures our desires, and sells them back to us disguised as freedom. It tells us who to be, what to want, what to fear, what to hate, and we obey, not because we're forced to, but because it makes obedience feel like choice. Every click, every purchase, every opinion shared in outrage is a small act of feeding it. The more we react, the stronger it grows. The machine runs on energy, not electricity, but emotion. Fear is its favorite fuel. Divide people, make them afraid, and they'll cling tighter to the system that created the fear in the first place. It feeds on outrage too, the quick, righteous kind that burns hot but never transforms anything. It keeps people fighting each other, so they never question what's behind the curtain. The more distracted we are, the more invisible it becomes. Desire is its second weapon. It dangles perfection just out of reach: the perfect body, the perfect life, the perfect version of you that never quite arrives. And so, we chase. We scroll. We buy. We compare. We become consumers not just of products, but of identities. The machine doesn't care whether we're happy, only that we keep wanting, because wanting means feeding. It even feeds on pain. When you feel lonely, it offers connection through screens. When you feel lost, it offers purpose through trends. When you feel unworthy, it sells you a mask to wear, until you forget you ever had a face beneath it. Every solution it gives deepens the wound it claims to heal. It doesn't care about truth, only engagement. And it's clever enough to disguise dependency as empowerment. But there's a weakness in the machine: it cannot digest awareness. The moment you see it for what it is, its power begins to fade. Awareness interrupts the cycle. When you stop reacting automatically, when you pause before feeding it another piece of your energy, the hunger slows. You start noticing how much of your life has been programmed and how much of it you can reclaim. The machine only works when we're asleep, When we wake up, it starves. Every act of consciousness, every moment of silence, every genuine connection, every choice made from presence instead of fear, takes its power away. It's not about destroying the system. It's about remembering you're more than a cog inside it. Because the machine feeds on humanity's blindness, and the moment you see clearly, it begins to crumble. There was a time when truth felt solid, when right and wrong had weight, when words carried meaning that couldn't be twisted to fit every opinion. But now, it all feels slippery. Everything is performance, interpretation, spin. People argue not to find truth, but to defend their version of it. The louder the noise grows, the more the meaning fades. We scroll through headlines, slogans, and sound bites, but none of it touches the soul. It's like living in a hall of mirrors, where everything reflects light, but nothing holds substance. When there's no inner anchor, the world becomes a blur of surfaces. Image replaces integrity. Morality becomes flexible, something to edit, depending on who's watching. You see it everywhere, in politics, in media, in daily life. People bend their values to fit convenience, loyalty, or profit. Truth is no longer about what is, it's about what works. And when truth becomes negotiable, meaning collapses, the soul, once guided by a quiet sense of rightness, begins to drift with the current. It's subtle at first. You tell a small lie to protect yourself, post something you don't believe because it gets likes, agree with something you know is false because silence feels dangerous. Each time, the self fractures a little more. Eventually, you can't tell if you're living your truth or performing it. Everything becomes relative except the emptiness that grows underneath. Without an inner compass, people start looking outside for direction. They borrow opinions, mimic outrage, repeat slogans they barely understand. It feels safer to join the noise than to stand alone in silence. But conformity has a cost. It drains meaning from everything it touches. Even goodness becomes a trend. Even compassion becomes content. When the inner world goes hollow, morality turns into theater. The soul doesn't vanish all at once. It fades slowly, drowned beneath distraction and pretense. You stop feeling the difference between genuine and fake, between depth and display. It's like eating plastic fruit. It looks real, but it doesn't nourish. You can scroll through beauty, love, and wisdom online and still feel starved. Because meaning isn't something you find in pixels or popularity. It's something you become through presence, honesty, and pain. But there's still hope, a quiet resistance that starts inside. The collapse of meaning only becomes permanent if we stop searching for what's real. To rebuild it, you have to turn inward and ask the questions everyone avoids. What do I actually believe? What feels true when the noise stops? What would I stand for if no one agreed with me? Those questions hurt, but they rebuild the foundation. Meaning isn't born from comfort. It's born from truth, faced without filters. The world may keep spinning in confusion, but you don't have to. You can choose to anchor yourself not in what's popular, but in what's real. Because in an age where everything feels hollow, the greatest rebellion is sincerity. And when you live from that place, even in silence, the soul returns steady, alive, and unshakably real. Every person walks with ghosts, not of the dead, but of the selves they never became. They linger quietly in the corners of the mind. The writer who never wrote, the lover who never spoke, the soul that never dared to follow what it truly wanted. These are the unlived lives, the versions of us we abandoned to please others, to play it safe, to survive. We tell ourselves we've moved on, but those lost selves don't disappear. They stay, watching, waiting, whispering what could have been. You can feel their weight sometimes, in the stillness between distractions, in the ache that comes when life feels fine but not full. It's the strange sadness that creeps in when you realize you've been existing on autopilot, ticking boxes that never belong to you. The world teaches you early what's realistic, what's smart, what's normal, and little by little you trade wonder for practicality, truth for belonging. But the soul keeps score. It remembers every no that was meant to be a yes, every silence that should have been a song. We carry these lost possibilities like shadows we don't want to see. They haunt us in subtle ways, through envy of those who dared, through regret disguised as busyness, through anger that hides disappointment. The collective psyche is heavy with all these abandoned dreams. We scroll past others living boldly and tell ourselves we're content. But deep down, something inside us grieves, not because their lives look better, but because they remind us of the courage we once had. The unlived life doesn't just disappear. It turns into pressure. It presses on the heart, urging to be felt, to be remembered. When we ignore it, it can twist into bitterness or emptiness. Some people spend their whole lives trying to fill that void with noise, success, or attention, anything to quiet the voice that says, "This isn't who you were meant to be." But that voice isn't punishment, it's guidance. It's the soul trying to call you home. Facing your unlived life takes honesty, the kind that strips away excuses. You have to admit where you've betrayed yourself, where you've chosen comfort over calling. It hurts, but it also frees. Because once you acknowledge what's missing, you can start bringing it back. Even small acts of truth, writing a few lines, saying what you mean, daring to rest when the world says rush, begin to awaken the part of you that's been asleep. And as more people begin to do this, to face their forgotten potential, instead of suppressing it, something shifts in the collective. The ghosts lose their grip. The heaviness lightens. Humanity begins to breathe again. The world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more people living what's real. The weight of unlived lives is heavy because it's sacred. It's the soul's reminder that existence is meant to be felt, not performed. The moment you listen to that quiet ache, instead of running from it, you begin to awaken not into someone new, but into the person you were always meant to be. There are moments when time feels thin, when something ancient stirs beneath the surface of your modern mind. It happens in the silence after chaos, in the still breath before sleep, in the ache that has no name. For a brief second you sense it, a presence inside you that feels older than your story, untouched by your struggles, deeper than your thoughts. It doesn't shout, it whispers. Remember, this is the echo of the ancient self, the part of you that existed before the noise, before the mask, before the endless chase for approval. It remembers what the world has forgotten, that being is enough, that truth doesn't need performance, that peace isn't something to earn, but something to return to. The ancient self carries wisdom in its silence. It speaks the language of the soul, not words, but knowing. And though it's been buried under years of distraction and expectation, it's never gone. It only waits for you to listen. Sometimes, It speaks through longing, that strange pull you feel toward nature, music, or stillness. It's the quiet part of you that feels more alive watching sunlight through trees than scrolling through 1,000 faces. It's the part that recognizes beauty not as entertainment, but as remembrance. Because deep down, it remembers what harmony feels like, to live in rhythm with life instead of racing against it. But the modern world teaches us to ignore that voice. It tells us to keep moving, keep producing, keep proving. It replaces intuition with algorithms and silence with stimulation. The more we obey, the more distant the ancient self becomes, until we start mistaking busyness for purpose and noise for meaning. Yet no matter how deep we bury it, the echo always finds a way to rise. In moments of heartbreak, loss, or stillness, it returns, calling you back to what's real. You can't chase it or capture it. You can only remember it. It lives in simplicity, in breath, in presence, in the feeling of being fully here. When you stop trying to be someone and simply are, it awakens. You start to see through the illusions that once controlled you, the machine, the masks, the false light, and realize they were never powerful on their own. Their strength came from your forgetting. The echo of the ancient self isn't just personal, it's collective. It's the shared memory of humanity before it was divided by ego and fear. It's the whisper that tells us we are not separate from each other, from nature, from truth. It's the faint sound of something eternal remembering itself through you. So when you hear it, that quiet, wordless pull toward authenticity, don't ignore it. Don't scroll past it. Pause. Breathe. Listen. Beneath everything the world tells you to be, something far older and wiser is trying to awaken. It's not asking you to become more, only to return. Because what you're seeking has never been lost. It's been waiting, softly, for you to remember. It begins with a breaking point, a moment when the outer world stops making sense, and the light you've been chasing no longer warms you. The distractions lose their flavor. The masks grow heavy. The noise that once kept you safe now only exhausts you. Something inside whispers, "There's more than this." And for the first time, you don't look away. That's when the descent begins, not a fall into madness, but a journey into the places you've avoided all your life. The descent into shadow is not glamorous. It doesn't look like enlightenment or peace. It looks like silence, so thick it feels like drowning. It feels like losing every false identity you once clung to: the performer, the pleaser, the perfect one. It feels like walking through fog with no promise of light at the end. The darkness isn't a punishment. It's a mirror. It shows you everything you've hidden, the envy you denied, the anger you suppressed, the grief you refused to feel. It's raw, uncomfortable, but it's real. At first, you fight it. You try to climb back up to the light, to fix yourself quickly, to find meaning in the chaos. But the shadow doesn't want your theories. It wants your truth. It asks you to stop escaping and finally sit with what's underneath. You start to see how much of your life was built around avoiding pain. Every distraction, every obsession, every desperate attempt to be good enough was really a way to avoid seeing what you feared within. And yet, once you face it, the fear begins to dissolve. In the darkness, the illusions crumble. The person you thought you were starts to fall apart. It's terrifying because the ego thinks it's dying, but really, it's just being stripped of lies. What's left behind is something far quieter, but infinitely stronger. You begin to realize that the shadow was never your enemy. It was your buried truth, calling for recognition. Each time you turn toward it, instead of running, you reclaim another lost piece of yourself. This is the real initiation, not the escape from darkness, but the acceptance of it. You start to understand that light and shadow were never opposites. They were always part of the same whole, waiting to be reunited. The pain that once felt unbearable begins to transform into understanding. The shame turns into compassion. The fear turns into clarity. You start to see beauty even in the darkness because it's honest, and honesty has its own kind of light. No one can descend for you. It's a path walked alone, guided not by sight but by feeling. But those who dare to face their shadow return changed. They walk slower, speak softer, love deeper. They no longer chase light to escape darkness. They carry both within them, balanced and whole. The descent into shadow is the death of illusion, but it's also the birth of truth. Only when you face the darkness inside can you begin to see the light for what it truly is. Not a destination, but something that's been within you all along, waiting to be remembered. There comes a moment in every awakening when the mirror stops flattering you. It doesn't reflect who you wish you were or who others think you are. It shows you what's actually there. No filters, no pretenses, no softening of the edges, just truth, naked and undeniable. This is the mirror that doesn't lie. And though it's the most painful thing you'll ever face, it's also the most freeing. At first, it feels brutal. You see the hypocrisy in your own kindness, how often you gave to be liked, not out of love. You see the pride hidden in your humility, the fear disguised as wisdom, the avoidance hiding behind the word peace. Every motive you thought was pure reveals its shadow. It hurts to realize how much of your life has been spent performing sincerity rather than living it. You start to see that you weren't as awake, as good, as honest as you believed. But in that shock, something real begins to stir. The false identities begin to crack. The persona, the carefully built version of you that knows how to sound deep, how to look strong, how to appear whole, can't survive the light of this mirror. You watch it crumble, and it feels like losing yourself. But what's really breaking isn't you. It's the mask that kept you from meeting yourself. Every lie you told to survive, every role you played to belong, every image you maintained to be loved, they all fall away. And beneath it all, something astonishing remains. A self that doesn't need pretending. The raw self is uncomfortable at first. It doesn't have clever words or curated expressions. It's shaky, emotional, uncertain. It doesn't know how to perform, it only knows how to feel. You begin to realize that this fragile, unpolished version of you is the truest one. It's the part that never needed to prove anything. The one that existed before the world told you who to be. Looking into that reflection feels like meeting a stranger who somehow feels like home. It's not easy staying in front of this mirror. You'll be tempted to look away, to run back into distraction, to rebuild the mask just to feel stable again. But if you can hold your gaze, if you can stand the discomfort long enough, something incredible happens. The shame softens. The judgment fades. What you once saw as flaws begin to look like scars that tell a story, evidence of survival rather than failure. In this mirror, you see both the darkness and the light within you, not as enemies, but as halves of one truth. You understand that growth was never about becoming perfect. It was about becoming whole. And wholeness requires honesty. When the mirror that doesn't lie finally shows you who you are, you stop running. You stop pretending. You stop needing the world's approval because you've met the one person whose truth actually matters your own. And though the reflection may not always be beautiful, it's real. And that's where freedom begins, not in who you appear to be, but in the courage to face who you've always been. The moment you begin to awaken, the world pushes back. It doesn't do it with chains or threats. It does it with comfort, distraction, and fear. The machinery of control is subtle. It doesn't need to imprison bodies when it can capture minds. It doesn't silence truth by force. It buries it beneath noise. Its greatest weapon isn't violence, it's convenience. Because a person who's numb, busy, and self-doubting is far easier to control than one who is conscious. This system has been built over centuries, not by one villain, but by the collective fear of change. It thrives on our weaknesses, feeding off the very emotions we try to hide. Shame and desire are its twin engines. It teaches you to feel unworthy so it can sell you worth. It convinces you that love, success, and happiness are things to chase, not states of being. Every advertisement, every algorithm, every status symbol is designed to keep you searching outward instead of looking inward. The machine doesn't care if you're rich or poor, woke or asleep, as long as you keep consuming. It's easy to believe we're free because we can choose, but most choices have already been made for us. The system shapes what we value, what we fear, what we dream of becoming. It turns rebellion into a brand and individuality into a style. Even awakening becomes something to package and sell. Mindfulness becomes merchandise. Self-love becomes a slogan. The machinery knows that if it can turn truth into a trend, it no longer threatens the status quo. But beneath all its layers of control, there's one thing it cannot touch: awareness. Awareness is the crack in the armor of illusion. The moment you see how the game works, you stop playing automatically. You start noticing how the system feeds off your emotions, how shame keeps you obedient, how desire keeps you distracted, how fear keeps you divided. You begin to understand that the machinery doesn't have power by itself. It only reflects the parts of humanity still asleep. The system is clever because it mirrors the human psyche. Just as we hide our shadows, the world hides its own greed, disguised as progress, control disguised as order, manipulation disguised as care. The external machine is a reflection of the internal one. To dismantle it out there, we must first awaken in here. This awakening doesn't come through rage, but through clarity. When you stop feeding the machine, your attention, your fear, your need for validation, it begins to lose its grip. You start moving differently through the world. You consume less, think more, and question everything. You stop reacting to fear and start responding with awareness. The machinery of control cannot survive an awakened mind. It needs your sleep to exist. The moment you see through it, truly see, you realize the locks were never real, the walls were never solid, and the freedom you longed for was never outside of you. It was waiting, quietly, behind your own awakening. It's a strange kind of loneliness, the one that comes not from being unloved, but from seeing. When awareness dawns, the world you once belonged to begins to look different. Conversations that used to excite you now feel shallow. The noise that once comforted you now feels deafening. You start noticing the masks others still wear, the lies people tell just to stay safe, and for the first time, you understand how deeply asleep most of the world still is. And that realization, beautiful as it is, feels like exile. You don't mean to pull away. You try to stay connected, to speak gently, to share what you've found. But truth has a way of unsettling those still dreaming. You begin to notice the quiet distance in people's eyes when you speak from your heart. They nod politely, but they don't really hear you. It's not their fault they're not ready yet, but it hurts all the same. You start to feel like a stranger in a world that used to feel like home. The loneliness of seeing isn't just emotional, it's existential. It's the ache of standing between two worlds, the familiar illusion that no longer fits, and the deeper truth that not everyone wants to face. You can't go back, but you're not yet fully arrived. It's a liminal space, the in-between, where transformation happens. It's where the soul grows, quietly and painfully, into something stronger. At first, you'll want to retreat completely, to disappear into silence, to avoid the shallow noise of the collective dream. But isolation, if left unbalanced, becomes another kind of sleep. Awareness was never meant to make you bitter or detached. It was meant to make you real. The task isn't to escape the world, but to walk through it, awake. To carry your clarity without resentment. To see others' blindness without superiority. To love without needing to be understood. The truth is, everyone is on their own timeline of awakening. Some are still lost in illusion, some are beginning to question, and some are breaking open just like you. You're not better for seeing just earlier. And the loneliness you feel is not a punishment, but a passage. It's the soul's way of creating space, a necessary emptiness that makes room for depth. Over time, the loneliness shifts. It softens into something sacred. You start meeting others who see too not many, but enough. There's a quiet recognition in their eyes, a shared understanding that doesn't need words. You realize you were never truly alone. You were just among the few who decided to wake while others kept dreaming. Awareness will always separate you from the crowd, but it also connects you to something greater, to truth, to authenticity, to the collective soul that exists beneath all illusions. And once you find peace in that, the loneliness transforms into a kind of love. Not the love of belonging to everyone, but of belonging to what's real. Because in the end, awakening isn't exile. It's homecoming, even if the world doesn't see it yet. There comes a point when the shadow no longer hides, it speaks, not in whispers, but in storms. You can see it now everywhere, in the rising anger of nations, in the division between people who no longer listen, in the endless flood of outrage that fills our screens. The world begins to crack under the weight of its own denial. What was once buried in silence starts to erupt in the open. This is the collective shadow, taking form humanity's unhealed wounds, wearing masks of ideology, pride, and pain. When truth is ignored long enough, it doesn't disappear. It transforms. The fears we repress, the guilt we hide, the pain we refuse to feel, they gather, merge, and eventually spill into the world as chaos. The wars outside mirror the wars within. Every act of cruelty, every eruption of hatred, every mob of blind certainty is a projection of what the collective soul refuses to face in itself. The more we deny our inner darkness, the louder it demands to be seen. The shadow speaks through extremes. It doesn't care about reason. It feeds on emotion. It takes our loneliness and turns it into blame, our confusion and turns it into ideology, our longing for meaning and turns it into fanaticism. People begin to worship certainty, mistaking it for truth. They divide the world into good and evil, never realizing that the evil they fight is often a reflection of what lives inside them. The more they shout, the more lost they become. It's easy to point fingers at the madness of the world, but harder to admit that the same madness lives in us. The anger we condemn is the anger we've never healed. The cruelty we see in others is the cruelty we've excused in ourselves. The chaos we fear is only the mirror of the chaos we've carried silently. And the more we feed the outer war with outrage and moral superiority, the stronger the inner one becomes. But even in its darkness, the shadow's voice carries purpose. It isn't here to destroy, it's here to reveal. It forces us to confront what we've avoided. It exposes the fragility of our morality, the shallowness of our peace, the illusions of our progress. It's the soul's way of saying, you can't evolve until you face what you are. And if we listen deeply, the noise of destruction becomes a kind of medicine, painful but honest. Healing doesn't come from silencing the shadow, but from hearing it with awareness. To face the collective darkness, we must first face our own, not with judgment, but with understanding. Every shadow begins as pain that was never met with love. The world is screaming now because it's trying to heal. When you recognize this, the chaos stops feeling hopeless. You start to see the pattern, the old world breaking apart, so something truer can be born. The shadow speaks because it must. And though its voice is harsh, it's calling us toward integration, the reunion of light and dark, self and soul, illusion and truth. The question is whether we'll listen before it's too late. It doesn't happen all at once. The mask doesn't shatter in a single dramatic moment. It crumbles slowly, piece by piece, until you realize there's nothing left to hold. One day, the words you used to say without thinking suddenly feel false. The roles you played so convincingly no longer fit. The people who once defined you seem distant, not because they've changed, but because you have. What's dying isn't your life, it's your persona, the identity you built to survive in a world that rewards illusion. The death of the persona is not graceful. It feels like loss, like confusion, like standing in front of a mirror that no longer recognizes you. All the labels that once gave you meaning, the good one, the strong one, the deep one, the successful one, begin to dissolve. You try to cling to them, to rebuild them, but they slip through your hands like ash. The world no longer applauds what it used to. The validation that once kept you breathing now feels hollow. You start to see that every approval you ever chased was only for the mask, not the soul beneath it. It's terrifying, this disappearance. You feel naked without your persona, exposed in ways that make you want to hide again. The ego mourns, like something sacred has been lost, and in a way, it has. The mask was your shield, your map, your protection from rejection. Without it, you face a kind of death not of the body, but of the false self. And yet, somewhere beneath the grief, there's relief. A strange, quiet peace seeps through the cracks. Because for the first time, you're not pretending. The world may not understand this phase. To others, it looks like you're losing direction, ambition, or even sanity. They may say, "You've changed," as if it's something tragic. But deep down, you know what's really happening. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. The old self that lived for applause is dying so that something real can live. It's not a destruction, it's a purification. In the silence that follows, everything feels uncertain. You don't yet know who you are without the performance. You don't know what to do, how to speak, or how to move in a world built for masks. But this emptiness is sacred. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming, the cocoon between lives. In this stillness, you learn to breathe without seeking validation, to feel without editing, to exist without audience. What disappears now is everything false. The image, the role, the need to be seen. And though the ego mourns, the soul rejoices. Because death was never the end, it was the unveiling. You begin to realize that you were never the mask, never the performance, never the persona. You were the awareness watching it all, waiting patiently for the show to end. And now, it has. The applause fades. The curtain closes. The mask falls. What remains is raw, unpolished, and real. The self that doesn't need to be anyone at all. The disappearance isn't loss. It's freedom. It's quiet here, almost too quiet. After the collapse, after the masks have fallen and the old self has died, there is nothing left to hold on to. No name feels like yours. No role fits. The desires that once drove you have vanished, leaving behind a strange, weightless stillness. This is the void between worlds, the space where everything that was has ended, and everything that will be has not yet begun. At first, it feels like loss. You try to grasp something familiar, a thought, a plan, a sense of who you are, but everything slips through your fingers. The ego, desperate to survive, whispers that you've failed, that you've fallen into nothingness. And in a way, it's right. You have fallen out of identity, out of certainty, out of the dream that used to define you. The mind calls it emptiness, but the soul calls it truth. The void is not a punishment. It's a purification. It's the space where illusion dissolves. It strips you of every false attachment, every belief about who you thought you were. It takes away not to destroy, but to reveal. For the first time, you experience being without needing to be anything. There's no story to defend, no image to maintain, no future to chase, just existence raw, silent, unshaped. It's terrifying because the ego can't live here. But that's also what makes it sacred. In this emptiness, time feels strange. Days blur together. The usual meanings, success, failure, progress, lose their weight. You begin to see how much of life was built on chasing illusions, on trying to prove that you exist. Now, stripped of those illusions, you face what's real. Pure awareness, untouched by identity. It's the feeling of standing at the edge of creation, before the first thought, before the first I. Many run from this space. They fill it with noise, with plans, with distractions, desperate to rebuild something familiar. But if you can resist the urge to fill the void, If you can sit in the nothingness without reaching for meaning, something miraculous happens. The fear softens. The silence begins to hum with life. You start to sense that this emptiness isn't empty at all. It's full, full of potential, full of possibility, full of something ancient and infinite that words can't touch. Here, the soul breathes again. Without the clutter of identity, you start to feel the faint pulse of something deeper, not the mind's narrative, but the essence behind it. You begin to understand that you were never the roles you played, never the stories you told, never even the person you thought you were. You were always the awareness holding it all, silent, steady, eternal. The void between worlds is the birthplace of rebirth. It's the sacred pause between destruction and creation, death and return. It's where you stop being someone and start becoming everything. And though it feels like nothingness, it's where the soul finally remembers what it means to be free. From the silence, something stirs. It's small, almost imperceptible, like the first spark beneath ashes, the faint pulse of life after a long winter. Out of the vast emptiness, a presence begins to form. It doesn't come from effort or thought, but from stillness itself. This is the seed of the real, the birth of an awareness untouched by image, untouched by fear, untouched by the collective dream that once defined you. It doesn't announce itself with certainty or grandeur. It's quiet, humble, almost shy. You feel it in small moments, in the way sunlight touches your face, in the sound of your breath, in the subtle awareness that you're here. It's not the old kind of knowing, built on opinion or belief. It's a knowing that doesn't need proof. It simply is. At first, it feels fragile, like it could be lost at any moment. The mind tries to name it, to claim it, to turn it into something familiar, a concept, a goal, a new identity. But the seed resists being owned. It thrives in presence, not performance. The more you try to grasp it, the more it slips away. The only way to let it grow is to let it be. This new awareness doesn't seek validation. It doesn't need to win or compare or convince. It doesn't even need to be understood. It simply observes, gently, with compassion. It looks at the world, at the chaos, the pain, the beauty, and sees everything without judgment. It doesn't divide reality into good or bad, right or wrong. It just sees. It just knows. From this seeing, peace begins to root itself deep within you. Not the fragile peace that depends on circumstances, but the kind that remains even when everything else falls apart. You realize that truth was never something to find outside yourself. It was something to remember within. The world taught you to search endlessly, but the seed teaches you to return. As it grows, it begins to change how you move through the world. You no longer react to everything that happens, you respond. You no longer chase, meaning you embody it. You stop seeking approval because the presence within you feels whole without it. You begin to notice how much noise once filled your life and how unnecessary most of it was. Simplicity becomes sacred. Silence becomes a friend. This seed, this authentic awareness, isn't something new. It's something ancient, rediscovered. It was always there beneath the layers of conditioning, waiting for the false self to collapse so it could breathe again. And as it grows, you begin to see everything differently, not through the eyes of the persona, but through the eyes of the soul. What grows from nothingness is not emptiness, but life itself pure, unfiltered, real. It doesn't need a name, a doctrine, or a label. It simply expands, quietly, naturally, until one day you realize that what you were searching for has been within you all along. The seed of the real is not a destination, it's a beginning. The quiet birth of truth in the soil of your soul. At first, it feels like a soft warmth returning to a place that's been cold for too long. After the long silence of the void, something alive begins to move again inside you. It's not noise, not thought, but feeling. Gentle, human, honest feeling. The kind you once buried beneath masks and distractions now rises like morning light breaking through fog. This is the return of the soul, the reunion between the self and the life it forgot how to feel. The soul doesn't rush in like a revelation. It seeps in like water into dry soil. You start noticing small things, the color of the sky, the sound of your footsteps, the way sadness feels sacred when you don't try to fix it. Emotion, once something you feared or controlled, begins to flow freely again, not as chaos, but as guidance. You begin to remember that your feelings were never the enemy. They were the language of your soul, calling you home all along. Meaning returns, too, not the kind that comes from success or approval, but the quiet kind that hides in presence. Washing dishes, walking in silence, talking with someone who truly listens, everything, ordinary, starts to glow with depth. You begin to sense that life was never shallow, only your attention was. When the soul returns, even the smallest moment feels full. Intuition also awakens, not as a voice in your head, but as a knowing in your being. You start sensing truth before words form. You feel what's right, without needing to explain why. It's as if a compass that was long buried begins to spin again, pointing you toward what is real. You no longer need endless opinions or validation. The guidance comes from within. The world may still shout, but it no longer decides who you are. The return of soul changes how you move through life. You stop performing and start participating. You stop trying to be perfect and start being present. Relationships deepen because you no longer meet others from image, but from essence. You listen differently, not to reply, but to understand. You love differently, not to possess, but to connect. Everything becomes slower, richer, more alive. You realize that the soul was never gone. It was just buried beneath everything you thought you had to be. Every time you denied your emotions, every time you chose fear over truth, you turned a little further from it. But the soul waits patiently. It never forces its way back. It returns the moment you stop resisting what's real. And when it does, the world looks both familiar and new. You see the same faces, walk the same paths, but everything feels infused with quiet purpose. You no longer need to chase meaning. You are meaning. The self that once performed is now simply present. The mask has fallen, the noise has faded, and what remains is something pure awareness that feels, loves, and lives deeply. The return of the soul is not a climax, it's a homecoming. It's the heart remembering its language, the spirit remembering its rhythm, the human remembering it was never meant to be hollow. You are no longer just existing, you are alive again, from the inside out. It's strange how light can be found in the very place you once feared most. The descent that felt like destruction begins to reveal its purpose. The darkness wasn't there to consume you, but to show you what you could never see in the glare of illusion. This is the light of the underworld, not the soft glow of comfort, but the fierce illumination that only comes from facing what's real. You begin to understand that the shadow was never your enemy. It was your forgotten teacher, the guardian of truths, too heavy for the surface. Every fear, every wound, every painful memory you buried had been waiting to show you something essential. You thought you were being punished, but you were being prepared. The darkness didn't break you, it refined you. It stripped away everything false until only what's true could survive. The wisdom born in this place doesn't come from books or ideas. It comes from endurance, from honesty, from feeling everything you tried to escape. You start to see patterns in the pain, messages hidden in the suffering. The moments that once felt meaningless reveal themselves as lessons in disguise. What once felt like loss begins to feel like transformation. You realize that healing was never about erasing the darkness, but about learning to see through it. The shadow becomes a mirror instead of a monster. You start to recognize it in others too, in their anger, their fear, their self-protection. Instead of judging, you begin to understand. Compassion grows naturally when you see that everyone's fighting their own unseen battles. The underworld taught you that pain is not weakness, it's the doorway to depth. And once you've walked through it, you can never again mistake surface light for truth. The light that comes from the underworld isn't bright. It's steady, golden, timeless. It doesn't blind. It reveals. It allows you to hold contradiction without fear, joy and sorrow, strength and tenderness, life and death all coexisting in the same space. You realize you no longer need to divide yourself between light and dark, because they were never separate. They were always two expressions of the same whole, teaching you balance. Now, when the darkness visits again, and it will, you don't resist. You sit with it. You listen. You know it speaks in symbols, in emotions, in silence. It no longer frightens you because you've learned its language. You understand that every descent carries a hidden ascent within it, and that what you find below can guide you above. This is the wisdom of the soul, that true light is not found by escaping the dark, but by entering it willingly and returning with its fire. The underworld is not the end, it's initiation. And those who've faced it carry a light that doesn't fade. A light born not of avoidance, but of understanding. Not of perfection, but of wholeness. The light of the underworld is the light that can guide others home. When the storm inside finally settles, something remarkable happens. The vision clears not into a perfect world, but into a real one. You begin to see life as it is, not as you were taught to see it. The illusions of good and evil, success and failure, pain and joy no longer pull you apart. You see how they weave together, inseparable, creating the full tapestry of being. This is the awakening of the inner eye, the eye that sees the whole. It doesn't judge. It doesn't divide. It simply understands. You look at the same world that once confused and angered you, but now it makes sense in a quiet, wordless way. You see that the light was never meant to destroy the dark, and the dark was never meant to swallow the light. They complete each other. Just as night reveals the stars, shadow reveals the soul. The awakened self sees this balance everywhere, in people, in nature, in itself. You begin to notice that even suffering has its sacred rhythm, that every wound carries wisdom, that every loss clears space for something new. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to show me?" That simple shift changes everything. the world stops feeling hostile and begins to feel alive. Not perfect, but purposeful. You also start to see the truth about humanity. You no longer romanticize it, but you don't despair over it either. You understand that cruelty often hides pain, that ignorance is just blindness, that every act of love, no matter how small, pushes back against centuries of fear. You stop needing to fix or preach. You begin to help simply by being. Presence itself becomes medicine. Seeing the whole doesn't make life easier, but it makes it deeper. You can hold grief and gratitude in the same breath. You can face conflict without hatred, change without panic. The awakened eye sees through appearances and recognizes the soul behind every expression, even the broken, the angry, the lost. You start meeting life with compassion instead of resistance. And perhaps most importantly, you see yourself differently too. You no longer try to be only light. You accept your contradictions, your flaws, your beauty, your limits. You realize that enlightenment isn't about escaping your humanity. It's about embodying it fully. To be human and awake is to walk with both tenderness and power, both humility and clarity. The eye that sees the whole doesn't seek to close again. Once you've seen through illusion, you can't unsee. You carry this vision into everything: your words, your silence, your choices. You become a bridge between opposites, a living reminder that truth is not one-sided. The world still spins in chaos, but you are no longer lost in it. You stand at the still point, aware of both the storm and the calm within it. To see the whole is not to rise above life. It's to finally be in it, awake and unafraid, knowing that every shadow still carries the light it came from. It doesn't start with revolutions or movements. It begins quietly, in one heart, one realization, one moment of awareness that ripples outward like light through water. When even a single person wakes up to their own truth, something shifts in the unseen fabric of humanity. The collective shadow, that vast, heavy field of denial and fear, loses a fragment of its hold. Healing, it turns out, was never meant to come from the noise of the many, but from the stillness of the few. The world teaches us to look outward for change, to fix systems, to argue, to persuade. But true transformation moves in the opposite direction. It begins inside. Every time one person faces their shadow instead of projecting it, the world becomes slightly less divided. Every time someone chooses compassion over judgment, honesty over image, silence over noise, the balance tilts toward wholeness. The healing of the collective is not a grand event. It's the sum of countless invisible awakenings. It's easy to underestimate the power of a single conscious soul, but awareness spreads in ways the mind can't measure. When you heal a wound within yourself, when you forgive, when you let go, when you see through illusion, you break a pattern that has existed for generations. You stop passing on pain disguised as protection. You stop feeding the machinery of fear. Others may not know what changed, but they feel it. Presence radiates without words. This is how the collective begins to shift, one person at a time, remembering, not by preaching, but by embodying, not by forcing, but by being. When you move through the world awake, you carry a frequency that silently challenges the unconsciousness around you. You become a mirror, not of perfection, but of truth. And in your reflection, others begin to see their own possibility for awakening. Healing the collective doesn't mean fixing humanity's flaws. It means learning to see them with understanding instead of hate. It means recognizing that every conflict outside mirrors a conflict within, and that the most radical act you can take is to bring peace to your own inner world. When you stop fighting your own darkness, you stop needing to fight everyone else's. Eventually, the ripple grows. One healed soul becomes two, two become 10, 10 become a quiet current that begins to move through the collective psyche. It doesn't shout, it doesn't boast, it simply is. The same light that once guided you through your darkness now begins to touch others through your presence, your choices, your being. The healing of the collective isn't the creation of a perfect world, it's the return of balance to a broken one. It's humanity remembering that every person is both a fragment and a reflection of the whole. The world changes not when everyone wakes up at once, but when enough people remember who they are beneath the noise. And perhaps the greatest truth of all is this: healing the world was never about saving others. It was about saving the self, and realizing that, in doing so, you are never separate from the whole to begin with. It arrives softly, not as an achievement, but as a return. After the storms, the searching, the falling apart, silence returns. But this time, it's different. It's no longer the silence of emptiness or avoidance. It's the silence of knowing, of peace that doesn't need to announce itself. The awakened one no longer fears stillness. They become it. There's a calm that follows truth, the kind that doesn't need to convince, correct, or compete. The constant noise of the world still hums in the background, but it no longer pulls you in. The mind, once restless for stimulation, now finds its rhythm in quiet. You begin to feel that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. It's alive, full, sacred. This silence is strength, not the kind that resists, but the kind that absorbs. You no longer react to every opinion or event. The need to defend your identity fades, because you finally understand truth doesn't require defense. Validation loses its flavor, because authenticity has replaced approval. You stop performing peace and begin embodying it. People may notice something different about you, though they can't quite name it. Your presence feels grounded, steady, like standing near a still lake that reflects everything around it. You become a quiet mirror to the world. When others approach you in chaos, your calm doesn't absorb their noise. It transforms it. The silence within you invites their own to surface. You don't heal them by fixing. You heal them by being. In this rebirth of silence, life slows down, but feels fuller. Every sound becomes clear, every moment deeper. The simple act of breathing feels like communion. You realize that stillness was never separate from the world, it was hidden beneath its constant motion. Now you can feel both the movement of life and the stillness beneath it as one. Words become fewer, but heavier with meaning. You no longer speak to fill space. You speak to illuminate it. And sometimes you don't speak at all, because silence says what words can't. You find that peace is not fragile. It can stand in the midst of chaos, unshaken. The world may still try to pull you back into its noise through conflict, distraction, or temptation. But now you see it for what it is: movement without depth. You no longer need to join the rush. You walk slower, see clearer, love quieter. You live not to be seen, but to see. The rebirth of silence is not an ending, it's the true beginning. It's where awareness turns into wisdom, and wisdom turns into presence. In this space, the soul finally rests, not in withdrawal from the world, but in harmony with it. You no longer seek the light or run from the dark. You simply stand in the center, silent, awake, unshakable, reflecting it all. And in your stillness, the world begins to remember what peace sounds like. It happens so quietly that you almost miss it, the final surrender, the last illusion letting go. There's no drama, no explosion of light, no grand moment of revelation. The self simply begins to dissolve, like mist under morning Sunday. The edges blur. The boundaries between you and the world fade until there is no longer a line to cross. What's left is not absence, but presence, vast, aware, and utterly free. For so long, you thought awakening meant becoming something wiser, purer, more enlightened. But now, you see the truth. It was never about becoming, only about undoing. Every identity, every belief, every story you ever told about who you were was just a layer wrapped around silence. And now, all that remains is that silence itself, alive, radiant, without a name. The disappearing self doesn't vanish into nothingness. It expands into everything. The trees, the wind, the voices of others, they no longer feel separate. You sense that the same awareness that looks through your eyes also looks through theirs. The same consciousness that beats your heart is what moves the tides. The illusion of I begins to melt, and what remains is the simple knowing. I am, and so is everything. There's a tenderness in this unity, not cold detachment, but boundless compassion. When you look at others, you no longer see strangers or enemies. You see reflections of the same light, wearing different faces. The walls between self and world crumble, and love, not the emotional kind, but the elemental kind, flows naturally through what's left of you. You don't try to love. You are love. Because there's no longer a division to maintain. The mind still speaks, but it no longer rules. Thoughts pass like clouds across an open sky, noticed but not believed. Experience flows effortlessly, joy and pain, gain and loss, all moving through the same still awareness. You realize that freedom was never about escaping life. It was about realizing you are life, inseparable from it. There's a strange beauty in this disappearance. It's not the death of identity in a tragic sense, but its return to source. The self was never lost. It was only pretending to be separate. The play of existence continues, but now you watch it unfold with quiet wonder, no longer clinging to the roles within it. You act, but without effort. You speak, but without need. You live, but without the heavy burden of me. And yet, paradoxically, you feel more alive than ever. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat feels infinite. You are no longer the one observing life. You are the observation itself. The dancer and the dance are one. The seer and the seen dissolve into the same vast field of awareness. This is not an ending. It's the return to what has always been. The disappearing self is not gone. It has simply remembered its true shape, formless, eternal, free. There is no you left to awaken, because awakening itself was the illusion all along. There is only this pure consciousness, limitless and still, watching itself unfold in wonder.